When a child suffers chronic stress or trauma or neglect, which of course this, we now know that children who are removed from their homes or children of the incarcerated, it typically doesn't seem to be the first time. This is kind of an ongoing issue, so it contributes to that chronic stress and trauma. So we know that it's going to have an impact on their physical, their cognitive, their emotional growth. We know that constantly they're in a state of fear or hyperarousal. We know, like you guys had mentioned, that it does disturb the attachment or the bonding process because that person was not there. And although we try to give them as many healthy experiences and relationships as we can, there's no one that can replace a child's father or a child's mother. Disassociation to cope, and of course this is something that we see a lot as well, and for a while this is something that I witnessed in my nephew, that he did not want to talk about his reality, and so he had like this little happy place where he would just mentally go through, and he was just like, I don't want to talk about it. And then he'll change his conversation to talk about, I saw this wonderful car. When I get older, I want to drive this car and stuff like that. So at that point, he just could not deal with his reality and he wanted to escape. That's something that we see a lot. And so if you hear statements like, oh, I'm just going to be here for a little bit, I'm not going to be here for long in this shelter, or my dad was the best dad, he gave me $100 at one point, those are a lot of their coping mechanisms because they don't want to deal with their reality. It does hinder their developmental milestones, and in some cases, when a child experiences a lot of trauma or neglect, we know that it actually does have a direct impact in the growth of the brain. And so we have learned that through various research. The other thing that we've learned is that children have a very hard time reacting to kindness or nurturing or stimulation. And the reason for that is that for this particular child, if I come close to this child and I do this, and my intention is to give them a high five, this child doesn't understand that if I'm the person that's going to hurt them or if I'm the person that's going to love them. So automatically their response is, I need to survive, I need to get away from this situation, and so forth. And any type of sudden move that we do, especially if it's something that the child is not used to, can actually trigger this hyperarousal and sense of survival for the child. So they really don't know how to respond to kindness. One of the things that we used to do with my nephew was just give him a lot of hugs and kisses, right? And for a while he was really uncomfortable. And children about 3 years old, that's all they want, right? They want to hug you and kiss you and stuff like that. But for him, it felt really uncomfortable. He felt really, he just did not want to do that. He just did not want to express that. And he was actually tying that experience to when his dad gave him a kiss and gave him a hug before he went to sleep. And he remembered that. He remembered that there was a time when his dad actually put him to bed and gave him a kiss. So every time someone gave him a kiss, he remembered that experience, and it was just too painful for him. He couldn't deal with that. So that's what bothered him about that expression of kindness. The other thing is that they have problems paying attention, controlling impulses, and a lot of times and we see this in their sleeping disruptions or in their eating disorders. For a child that has gone through chronic stress, trauma, and neglect in the home, especially when we talk about domestic violence or severe physical abuse or neglect, it can be very difficult for them to sit down in a chair and pay attention, right? I mean, some of you are kind of moving around because you've been here for about 40 minutes, and it's a little uncomfortable, right, to just be sitting down. And so for children that have gone through this experience and that continue to struggle with this experience can be very, very difficult. If I say, Johnny, tell me what 2 + 2 is, and Johnny doesn't know the answer, he can't sit down on his chair, he's having a hard time focusing, then my initial response is going to be, this child needs some type of medication, they need to be diagnosed with something because they just cannot focus. And oftentimes we fail to say, you know what, Johnny, tell me what's going on in the home. Is there something that I can help you with? Tell me about what you did today. Johnny's mentality might just be that, when I get home, is my mom going to be okay? Is my dad going to be there? Am I going to get beaten again? Am I going to get touched again? Is there going to be food for me and my brothers? What am I going to do? Am I going to go to the neighbors if my parents start fighting? And so forth. So all these things are going through Johnny's head, and then we're expecting Johnny to tell me what 2 + 2 is. So oftentimes we need to look at the background to be able to really help this child. Again, like I said, they're focused on survival, and oftentimes they lack empathy. The other thing is that they're going to have difficulty with meaningful relationships unless they have some type of intervention. I wanted to just quickly talk about the stages of grief, because I feel that these are probably some of the most important information that we need to have to be able to help children of the incarcerated. When we talk about the stages of grief from an adult perspective to a child's perspective, they're very different. For a child that has a parent incarcerated, it's a very, very difficult situation. As a child, if you're told that your parent has passed away and they're somewhere in heaven and they're going to be an angel for you and they're going to watch over you, you somewhat comprehend that situation. You somewhat say, okay, I'm not going to be able to see them physically anymore, but they're watching over me. For a child to be told that their parent is alive, but they can't see them, they can't touch them, they can't hug them, they can't be there on their birthday, can be very, very difficult. I cannot tell you how many times my nephew said, I want my dad to be here for my birthday. If I can just make one wish, it's going to be that he's here for my birthday. Unfortunately, that's something that we had very little control over. But it's very, very difficult for children of the incarcerated. And they go in and out of these stages every day, and you'll see these types of behaviors, especially when birthdays come around, when Christmas comes around, during Easter, any type of celebration that has some significance to that child. You'll see a lot of these behaviors. Oftentimes it's that denial, it's the anger. They no longer can deny the situation, so a lot of it comes from anger. And now we know that anger comes from two sources, and that's fear and lack of power. And for a child that has a parent in jail, that fear of never seeing them again is just too much for them to comprehend. Or the sense that there's nothing they can do about having their father in jail is that sense of lack of power. So the way they actually express that is through anger. The other thing is bargaining, depression, and of course acceptance. The level that we want children to be at is, of course, try to accept the situation. Does it make it any less painful? No. Children understand that, maybe once they get to the level of acceptance, they somewhat understand the situation. They somewhat can cope with it, they can live with it, but it doesn't make it any less painful for a child to know that their parent is in jail and, just somewhat understand the situation. The impact of parental incarceration on children, of course, physically, they really have a higher risk of experiencing poverty, neglect, and lack of basic needs. And that is because if there was two parents in the home, there's now one, and it's going to be a struggle to put food on the table. So it's going to be a struggle to stay home. It's going to be a struggle to find those basic needs for children. They're also at risk for physical and sexual abuse, like we touched and talked about earlier, eating and sleeping disruptions. We have a child there that has a parent in jail, and every night for about 2 weeks, he would get up in the middle of the night and start screaming, "Don't take my daddy, don't take my daddy." And so we know that it has a direct impact on their ability to just survive and be a child, be somewhat of a normal child and have a normal childhood. They oftentimes have those physical aches that they cannot explain. So they'll say, "It really hurts here." And so they get checked. The doctor says, "You know what, there's really nothing wrong with the child," but they're internalizing their emotions. And they cannot express themselves and say, "It hurts me that my dad is in jail or that my mom's in jail. It hurts my heart. I feel a deep hole in my stomach." And they can't say that, so they in exchange think that it's some type of ache or some type of pain. And also, of course, they're more at risk of experiencing several placements. And we realize that children that come into our care, they're probably experience about 5 different placements before they even get to the shelter. And so that's 5 different set of rules, structures, and people around them. The other thing is that emotionally, and we touched on this, it really does impact their sense of attachment and bonding, not just with the parents themselves, but also with the people around them. They experience separation, loss, and grief issues, anxiety, depression, anger, guilt. They always feel like there's something they could have done to avoid this situation. There's a lot of symptoms of PTSD, And they're also considered this invisible population among our society. And this invisible population is considered that because children that have parents in jail, they don't go up to their teacher and say, you know what, my father just got arrested. Or they don't tell the counselor, hey, my mom's been in jail for 2 months. They don't tell, the teacher during a parent conference that their mother has been in jail for drug addiction. They'll say they're working or they're busy, they cannot come, they cannot make it. And so these children really have no voice in our society. And so part of us being here is because we want to make sure that these children have some resources available to them. They share the same feelings and emotions as another population that we have in our society, and that is military children, with one big difference. And this I learned from the inmates in jail. They said children of the military are heroes and children of the incarcerated are zeros. And that's basically what a child feels like because we have very little resources available for them. There's a lot of movement within the past 2 years to try to get some resources for children of the incarcerated. But we have support groups for children of the military, right? People know what to do and what to say. I mean, we have a child in the classroom and we say, we're going to make sure that, Philip feels great today because his dad's away and it's Father's Day, so let's do something special for him. But we never take the time to say, you know what, Johnny has his dad in jail, and he's probably going to have a hard time because today's his birthday. So what can we do to help him feel better? And the reason for that is because Johnny doesn't really share about what's going on in his life and that he actually witnessed parental incarceration and how much of an impact that has had in his life. So they are often considered an invisible population. The other thing is that these children are at a high risk of losing their parents forever due to parental termination. And basically what that means is individuals that go to jail, particularly for a drug addiction, they're probably given a sentence from anywhere between 12 and 16 months. Usually safety plans are 1 year, right? You do all this stuff within a year and then there's a possibility you can get your children back. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. And so they're at a high risk of losing contact with their parents forever. Behaviorally, they really resent authority figures. And if a child witnesses parental incarceration, or parental arrest, I should say, who becomes the good guy and the bad guy in that situation? The officer is the bad guy because they're taking my parents away from me. And they didn't do anything. They love me, right? And so for that child, they're already building this template in their head that any type of authority figure is a bad person, right? And that includes teachers, that includes caseworkers, anybody that has a badge, anybody that's bigger and that talks to them and has some influence in their well-being. And so they really, really have this distorted view of society. They have inappropriate roles, right? Especially if Johnny's dad was arrested, what do we tell Johnny? You're now going to be the what of the house? The man of the house, right? You're now the man of the house. Of course, we don't expect Johnny to go get a job and, help with, whatever's at home, but we do give him those parental and inappropriate roles. And ultimately, Johnny's role is just to be a child because he is a child, okay? Oftentimes, they try to save the family name or they embrace the family lifestyle. And that often happens because we tell children, you're going to be just like your father, right? Or just like your mother. And so they say, you know what? I know how to do that. I know how to be like them. And so they embrace that family lifestyle. And oftentimes they decide, I'm not going to make those same mistakes. I'm going to be better. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to be a productive person, and I'm not going to do that. And then they're also at risk of replacing their parents in the criminal justice system. If you had to guess the percent or the possibilities of a child replacing their parent in the criminal justice system, what would you say? What would they be? 50%? Anybody else? 70? 60 to 80%. Okay? Children are at 60 to 80% possibility of replacing their parents in the jail system. So if I had a lottery ticket and I said, you know what, you have 60 to 80% possibility that this is going to be a winning number, would you take it? Yes, of course, right? Those are pretty good odds. But unfortunately, that's what we look at. Studies have shown that those are the statistics. And so when I go to the jail system and I tell them, most of them would agree. I don't want my child to replace me. I don't want my child to be sitting here 20 years from now. And so that's something that we can share with individuals. The other thing is that studies, even at third grade level, there's a correlation that says that if a child fails third grade reading level, that they're more likely to end up in the jail system. Isn't that interesting? And people use these numbers to say, we're going to need 200 jails in 20 years. We're going to need these many officers in 20 years and so forth. In the mind, of course, in cognitive level, it impacts their brain development, the attachment and bonding process, academic failures, school performance, and also, like I mentioned before, they really have a distorted view of society and rules in general.